Hexproof is a keyword that prevents opponents from targeting permanents or players with spells or abilities. While a player may still target their own permanents of Hexproof, this ability essentially protects something from removal or other negative effects. While a permanent with Hexproof can still be destroyed, exiled, or otherwise taken care of, the number of direct answers to cards with Hexproof are naturally limited. And while some cards grant Hexproof to other permanents or to the players, today we'll be focusing on cards that have Hexproof themselves. Starting us off at number 10, we have Narset Enlightened Master. This legendary human monk costs 3 generic mana, as well as 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 white mana, has 3 power and 2 toughness. Alongside Hexproof, Narset also has First Strike, meaning it will deal combo damage in combat before a creature that blocks it. And whenever Narset Enlightened Master attacks, you exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until the end of the turn, you may cast as many of the non-creature cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. While this card did not see much play in sanctioned formats, Narset quickly rose to prominence in the Commander format. In this format, any legendary creature can be your commander, and are able to be cast from outside the game, almost like an extra card in your starting hand. Decks built around Narset ran various spells that gave their player an extra turn in hopes of hitting at least one of them each time Narset attacked. The Narset player would take as many extra turns as they could manage, getting far ahead in cards and mana, and even potentially killing players in the process if they didn't run out of gas. While powerful builds arounds like Narset were far from uncommon in the format, her naturally having Hexproof often meant a player was forced to use mass removal just to also hopefully get rid of the Narset. But even then, given the nature of Commander, players would simply just recast Narset from the Commander zone for 2 more mana and try again. While Commander has no set mana like other formats, Narset was a prominent and dominant Commander since it printed in 2014 through the next couple of years. These days, Narset no longer has quite the reputation she used to, but her dominance in competitive Commander after her printing is enough for the 10th spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Dream Trawler. This Sphinx from Theros Beyond Death costs 2 generic, 2 white, and 2 blue mana, and has 3 power and 5 toughness. Dream Trawler has flying, which means it can only be blocked by creatures with flying or reach, as well as lifelink, which means whenever it deals damage, you gain that much life back. And whenever you draw a card, Dream Trawler gets +1 power until the end of the turn and draws you a card whenever it attacks. While the card does not have Hexproof inherently, you are able to discard a card to tap Dream Trawler and give it Hexproof. Since the tapping is not part of the cost and instead part of the ability, you're able to give the card Hexproof even while it's already tapped. This also means if an opponent tries to destroy it in response to you giving it Hexproof, you're simply able to discard another card to protect it again. This means even though Dream Trawler doesn't always have Hexproof, it's so easy to protect that spending removal on it isn't wise unless its controller has no cards in hand. And since Dream Trawler draws a card whenever it attacks, it's much harder to actually run the Dream Trawler's controller out of cards to discard to protect it. Dream Trawler was far and away the most dominant card in the Theros Beyond Death limited environment, and since then has made splashes into the Pioneer format. Some variants of Control run a copy of Dream Trawler in the main deck with more in the sideboard. While Control decks in recent years have moved on to non-creature card win conditions, in certain matchups they do sometimes board into more creatures. These Control decks are able to stall the game out long enough to cast Dream Trawler with plenty of cards in hand to protect it. Indomitable Creativity decks in the format have also taken to running Dream Trawler in the sideboard for when their primary combo plan is played around in the post-sideboard matches. Dream Trawler, although not a premier threat in the Pioneer format, has certainly found a niche in competitive play. And at number 8, we have 9 Lives. This enchantment costs 1 generic mana and 2 white mana. Beyond having Hexproof, 9 Lives has an ability where if a source would deal damage to you, instead prevent that damage and put an incarnation counter on 9 Lives. When 9 Lives has 9 or more incarnation counters on it, you exile it, and whenever 9 Lives leaves the battlefield for any reason, its controller loses the game. Hexproof is generally a bonus on most cards, although on 9 Lives it's more of a necessity, since without it, your opponent would be able to kill you by just removing the enchantment. Even with Hexproof, the card isn't too great, since only 9 sources of damage are needed to kill you after it's played, no matter how much damage those sources actually do. However, players quickly found the card synergizes quite well with the enchantment Solemnity that prevents both players and all non-planeswalker permanents from getting any counters of any kind. With both enchantments out together, 9 Lives will prevent all damage dealt to you, but in turn not get any counters in the process. This essentially makes you as a player immune to damage, and is a lock most decks aren't built to be able to play around. Most decks don't run direct alternative win condition, meaning the best most players can hope for is that 9 Lives player is unable to kill them before running out of cards in their deck. This combo of cards has seen the most success in MTG's Arena historic format, thanks to cards such as Sithis Harvest's Hand directly being added to the format. The enchantment archetype known as Enchantress has become a competitor in the format. The deck can both search and protect both halves of the combo while having a game plan that actively benefits off of playing the cards. Most often by itself, Solemnity is too narrow of an effect to be impactful in any given matchup. However, in Enchantress decks, every enchantment cast and on board represents more card advantage and attacking potential, so these Enchantress decks can offset the downside of running this lock combo. That said, it is about the only strategy that makes consistent use of the combo, and even then, Enchantress variants in older formats don't even run it, which is why 9 Lives is only 8th on this list. And at number 7, we have Avabruck Caretaker. This human werewolf counts for 4 generic and 2 green mana, and has both 4 power and toughness. Beyond having Hexproof, Avabruck Caretaker allows you to put 2 +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control at the beginning of your combat on your turn. Since this card is a werewolf, it's a dual-face card with another card on its backside. Like other werewolves from Innistrad, Crimson Vow, and Midnight Hunt, this card transforms into the other side via the day and night mechanic. Avabruck Caretaker has the keyword Daybound, which means if a player casts no spells during their own turn, it becomes night next turn. During night, Avabruck becomes Hollow Hedge Huntmaster. This werewolf has 6 power and toughness as well as a Hexproof keyword. It also gives Hexproof to all other permanents you control. In addition, at the beginning of your combat on your turn, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. If either player casts at least 2 spells during their own turn, it will become day the next turn. Avabruck Caretaker will change between its 2 forms depending on if it's day or night in game. And if you cast the creature while it's at night, it will enter the battlefield as the stronger Hollow Hedge Huntmaster. While the front half of Avabruck Caretaker is not terrible, as a 6 mana value card, it leaves a lot to be desired. However, the backside is much more powerful, growing every creature as well as protecting them in the process. Since Hollow Hedge Huntmaster has Hexproof itself, every single permanent you control will be safe from targeting from your opponent. This has led to aggressive green decks in Standard adopting Avabruck Caretaker as a top-end threat. In the Pioneer format, decks built around Winota join our forces actively cheats powerful humans into play from the deck, and many builds run Avabruck Caretaker as one of their top-end hits. Though, considering an opponent simply has to play 2 spells to change, the card is far from perfect. However, the fact that its front half also has Hexproof means that it will usually survive to be flipped to its stronger backside, often buffing creatures in the meantime. And at number 6, we have Lotus Field. Lotus Field is a land which enters the battlefield tapped and requires you to sacrifice 2 lands when it enters as well. In exchange for losing 2 of your lands, you gain a Hexproof land that taps for 3 mana of any one color. Now, at face value, this is pretty bad since this doesn't even put you ahead on curve for mana. Since when it enters, you're forced to get rid of 2 lands and thus go behind on mana before this brings you back to even. The power of Lotus Field comes from being able to untap it and use it multiple times a turn. In Pioneer, an entire deck has formed around the idea of untapping Lotus Field as much as possible to cast a high mana value spells. Vizier of Tumbling Sands can be discarded for 1 and a blue mana to both untap a permanent and draw a card, meaning you can tap Lotus Field to use the ability, then untap Lotus Field with the ability, and then net 1 blue mana and replace the card in your hand. These decks are designed to generate as much mana as possible, even using Thespian Stage to copy Lotus Field while it's already on the battlefield. These decks are so focused on their primary game plan of making mana with Lotus Field that the actual win conditions are often left in the sideboard to be searched out later with Mastermind's acquisition. Lotus Field has proven to be a potent option in the Pioneer format, and no short thanks to the card having Hexproof. The keyword helps this deck from being blown out by land destruction that would otherwise stop other land-centric big mana decks. The deck has proven relevant enough in the Pioneer format that Wizards of the Coast even released a pre-constructed Challenger deck built around the Lotus Field combo. However, as the format has progressed and more sets have been added, the deck has fallen to being more of a rogue option in the metagame. And at number 5, we have Carnage Tyrant. This dinosaur costs 4 generic and 2 green mana, while having 7 power and 6 toughness. Beyond Hexproof, the creature also has Trample, which means any excess damage it deals in battle with a creature is dealt to the defending player. Carnage Tyrant is also unable to be countered, which combined with Hexproof means no single targeting card can answer Carnage Tyrant while being cast or on the battlefield. Standard instantly skewed towards Tyrant with its print in the Ixion block. While initially Temur Energy was still the best deck and ran only a few copies of Tyrant, between eventual rotation and the metagame progressing things eventually shifted towards green-black Explore decks. Tyrant dominated these more mid-range focus matchups, given that it was able to dodge most removal and push through damage in the face of small chump blockers that the Explorer decks put out. The card also saw play in other formats, seeing experimentation in decks like Volakut in Modern and other red-green stompy decks. Carnage Tyrant's efficient and aggressive stats help make up for its relatively high mana value, but could do so much to help its playability in non-rotating formats. As such, while most decks in older formats did not favor Tyrant, big mana decks would sometimes find homes for copies of it. While the card is hard to remove, it also doesn't offer much in the way of advantages. And usually, creatures that only really offer offensive stats have a low mana value or skill throughout the game to make them more competitive. To this day, Tyrant occasionally shows up in Modern and Pioneer sideboards, although the card is nowhere near as ubiquitous as it once was. However, its former dominance as Standard, coupled with still showing up every now and then, is enough for it to be 5th on this list. Coming in at number 4, we have Thrun, the Last Troll. Thrun is a similar card to our previous entry in that its value comes in being quite difficult to kill. This legendary troll shaman costs 2 generic and 2 green mana and has 4 power and toughness. Like Carnage Tyrant, Thrun cannot be countered as well as having Hexproof. Notably, Thrun was printed at a time before Hexproof had become a keyword, meaning the card actually wrote out the full text for the ability. Thrun also has one more ability. For 1 generic and 1 green mana, you are able to regenerate Thrun at any time. Regenerate is a keyword no longer used in Magic the Gathering that has since been replaced with temporary indestructibility. Regenerating a creature means the next time this permanent would be destroyed, tap it, remove all damage from it, and remove it from combat. Essentially, in exchange for tapping down the creature, you could save it from being destroyed. This made Thrun even more hard to kill than Carnage Tyrant, since not even combat damage could kill Thrun if the mana was available to regenerate him. While in Standard, Thrun quickly rose to playability. However, most decks ran Thrun in the sideboard, specifically aiming to bring the card in against decks with a high density of removal. Thrun by himself isn't too impressive as just a 4/4 with no offensive abilities. But in mid-range matches where Thrun could blank all removal spells pointed at him and survive combat as long as 2 mana was available, Thrun quickly proved to be a potent threat. Some decks even began to run Thrun in some number in the main deck, with the card quickly splashed into Legacy and Modern as well. However, Thrun's slowness and lack of offensive power have led to a decrease in the card's general playability. What was once one of the most common cards in modern green sideboards now shows up just every now and then in the occasional list. However, the fact that this creature from 2011 can still see any competitive play at all over a decade later speaks to its spot on this list. And at number 3, we have Slippery Bogle. Bogle costs 1 hybrid blue-green mana, which means it can be cast for either 1 blue or 1 green mana. This 1 mana value creature has 1 power and toughness and only has hexproof when it comes to abilities. While this makes it without contest the most simple card on this list, it's also one of the ones that has seen the most play. That's because Slippery Bogle is the lowest mana value hexproof creature alongside Gladecover Scout. While neither of these creatures are impressive on their own, what makes them playable is how good they are in aura-focused aggro decks. Generally speaking, using an aura is something of a risk since it turns your opponent's removal into a 2-for-1. They both kill the creature and the aura that was enchanting it. By enchanting a creature like Slippery Bogle, it's much harder to disrupt someone and allow them to play multiple auras onto a single creature without too much worry of removal. Aura decks built around Slippery Bogle have existed since 2012, leveraging cards like Daybreak Coronet that require to use multiple auras on the same creature to benefit. Of course, these Bogle decks were far from perfect. A Diabolic Edict style effect could still remove the Bogle, although those have never seen as much play as hard removal, especially in the modern format where Slippery Bogle has seen the most success. While the deck has not seen any meta relevance in recent years, the printing of Lightpaw's Emperor's Voice has boosted aura strategies in general and allowed the deck to see some play in Modern to this day. Similar decks have also popped up in the common card only Pauper format, seeing as both Slippery Bogle and Gladecover Scout are both commons. While by no means the best deck in Pauper, and not even the best aggro deck, Bogles has remained a consistent competitor in Pauper events. And even in more competitive formats, it has stayed at least a fringe playable threat since first breaking into Modern. And at number 2, we have Sylvan Caryatid. This plant costs 1 generic and 1 green mana and has 0 power and 3 toughness. If having 0 power naturally wasn't enough, the card also has the keyword Defender, which prevents it from attacking at all. Naturally, the card also has hexproof and can be tapped for 1 mana of any color. Generally speaking, these mana producing creatures are best when they're at a mana value of 1, but strong enough 2 mana value ones often see play as well. In the case of Sylvan Caryatid, it having hexproof means that your opponent is not able to easily disrupt your mana ramp. Mana dorks are often the most quickly killed creatures, with burn and hard removal being spent usually on dorks in the first few turns. So while Sylvan Caryatid can't be cast on turn 1 like Birds of Paradise, it will usually survive a turn cycle that would have otherwise killed a Birds of Paradise before it's even able to tap for mana once. It also helps that Sylvan can produce mana of any color, which instantly gave it a home in the Khan's Block Standard, which was dominated by 3 and 4 color decks. Eventually, Sylvan rotated and lacked the power level needed to make a splash in Modern as a format. However, with the introduction of Pioneer format, Sylvan quickly became one of the premier mana dorks in the format. The 5-color Niv-Mizzet Reborn deck in the format needs a high density of colors, and Sylvan Caryatid is able to fill any gaps what the mana base is currently able to produce on any given turn. It also has found a home in a dedicated Green Devotion deck. While those decks also play 1 mana value dorks, they also run Caryatid, especially given the prominence of red-black mid-range in the format and the amount of removal spells that come with it. Caryatid's hexproof is integral to why it has become a staple in Pioneer decks. But while the next card on this list doesn't see as much play currently as Caryatid, its historical impact and power are enough to put it over Sylvan Caryatid. And finally, at number 1, we have Geist of St. Traft. This legendary spirit cleric costs 1 generic, 1 white, and 1 blue mana, and has both 2 power and toughness. Whenever Geist of St. Traft attacks, you create a 4 power and toughness angel token that is also tapped, and attacking that is exiled at the end of combat. In theory, Geist is a small, weak body who provides pressure through the angel tokens it produces, that, while unable to be targeted thanks to hexproof, is vulnerable to dying in combat. However, as we've seen with Slippery Bogle, competitive decks with Geist early on built around auras such as Spectral Flight. These decks would aim to make it so Geist was the biggest creature or simply hardest to block creature, and would beat down with both him and the angel tokens every turn. Outside of Standard, however, other formats also adopted the card, with mid-range and control decks in Modern quickly adopting Geist as a slow win condition. These decks would remove or counter your opponent's threats and only attack with the Geist on turns where doing so is safe. It's important to note that at this point in Magic the Gathering, legendary creatures work differently. Today it works in a way that each player can both control only 1 copy of a specific legendary creature. However, at the time of Geist of St. Traft's printing, only one copy could exist on the board at all. If you controlled a Geist and your opponent cast one, both copies would be sent to the graveyard and neither player would get to have one. This made Geist of St. Traft into both the dominant threat of these formats, but also one of the only clean ways to remove an opponent's Geist. The card was dominant enough that Phantasmal Image saw play as a 2-mana clone effect that could enter and copy Geist of St. Traft just to remove your opponent's copy from the field. In 2013, the legendary rules changed to how they work now, and Geist has continued to find success in even Modern and Legacy afterwards. Over the years, Geist has fallen out of the limelight, usually only seen play in some builds as Modern Spirit decks. Despite not being as relevant recently, Geist was once one of the most potent creatures in the game, partly thanks to Hexproof making it so difficult to remove, especially for the time of its printing. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any cards you think we may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, please let us know down in the comments below.